Trump's tariffs on Canada just exploded into a full-blown economic disaster, and the fallout is spreading faster than anyone predicted. While economists warned this would happen, the reality is hitting harder than even the worst-case scenarios. We're talking about a trade war that's ripping apart one of America's most vital partnerships, and the damage is already visible on both sides of the border. So what exactly went down on August 7th? And why are economists calling this economic suicide? To understand the magnitude of what just happened, we need to look at the numbers that Trump doesn't want you to see. On August 7th, Trump's latest tariff escalation officially took effect, hitting Canada with a devastating 35% tariff rate, a massive jump from the previous 25%. This wasn't just another policy tweak. This was economic warfare against America's second largest trading partner, a country that imports more American goods than any other nation except Mexico. The timing couldn't have been worse. These tariffs kicked in just as new economic data revealed the true cost of Trump's trade policies. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that the U.S. economy added only 73,000 jobs in July, a number so embarrassing that Trump immediately fired the Bureau's commissioner, accusing her without evidence of manipulating the data. But firing the messenger doesn't change the message. The American economy is slowing down, and Trump's tariffs are a major reason why. Here's what makes this particularly devastating. Canada isn't just any trading partner. In 2024, Canada bought $349 billion worth of American goods while exporting $413 billion to the U.S. That's a massive $63 billion trade surplus that Trump claims justifies his tariffs. But economists are calling this logic fundamentally flawed.
Well, first of all, I start off every interview with saying how much we love Americans, how much we love the U.S. And as I've said on this show many times, that a tariff on Canada is a tax on the American people. And as you've seen, the study from Yale, it's going to cost Americans $2,400. Manufacturing employment in the U.S., there's over 37,000 people since April have lost their jobs. It's the lowest rate in 5 years, and it's just not working. Let's create the AmCan Fortress, two strongest countries in the world. Again, this is hurting the American people as the rest of the countries, including Canada, is diversifying our trade. We're seeing a 25% increase in trade with the European Union. The UK is up by 30%. So as we're diversifying and onshoring products, the American people are losing their jobs.
What would the impact be for Canada and for the U.S. if President Trump pulled out of that agreement?
Well, it would be unfortunate. We directly employ, just Ontario alone, 9 million Americans, and across the entire country of Canada is probably closer to 20.
The real story isn't about trade deficits. It's about integrated supply chains that have taken decades to build and can be destroyed in months. According to recent studies, including one from Yale University, these tariffs are costing American workers dearly. Manufacturing employment has hit its lowest rate in 5 years, with over 37,000 Americans losing manufacturing jobs since April alone. Meanwhile, the average American family now faces an additional $2,400 annual cost burden from these trade policies. Trump's justification for the tariff increase is equally problematic. He's claiming Canada has failed to stop the flow of fentanyl across the northern border. But Canadian government data shows that less than 0.1% of all fentanyl seizures entering the U.S. between 2022 and 2024 were made at the Canadian border. Almost all the rest was confiscated at the Mexican border. This means Trump is punishing Canada for a problem that's overwhelmingly coming from Mexico. The economic impact is already devastating, and it's hitting American consumers directly. The Tax Foundation estimates that Trump's tariffs amount to an average tax increase of nearly $1,300 per U.S. household in 2025. But that's just the beginning. The Yale Budget Lab projects that middle-income families could face lifetime losses of up to $22,000 from these policies. Think about that for a moment. Trump's tariffs are effectively a massive tax hike on American families, disguised as economic nationalism.
Yeah, well, this is going to hit a lot of products that we Americans love to buy. Computers, electronics, coming in from countries like China, Vietnam, Malaysia being hit with 30, 20, 19% tariffs. Clothing and shoes coming in from China, Vietnam, India, going to be hit with 30, 20%, 25 tariffs. Watches now on the list because of Americans' love for Swiss watches. That's going to be tariffed at 39%. Alcohol coming in from the European Union, countries like France and Italy. That's wine and spirits going to be tariffed at 15%, and toys being tariffed at 30 to 20% coming in from China and Vietnam. There are many, many estimates to suggest what this may cost American families. The most recent estimate that we have is from the Yale Budget Lab just this month, projecting that because of all of these tariffs, if they stay in effect, it's going to cost the average family $2,400 a year. Obviously, that is significant, as Americans, we know, are worried about these tariffs, worried about their finances, worried about inflation. That is a significant hit to the average American family.
When you break down the specific impacts, the picture becomes even clearer. Computers and electronics face 30% tariffs from China. Clothing and shoes carry 20 to 25% tariffs. Even toys for children now come with 20 to 30% additional costs. These aren't luxury items, these are everyday necessities that working families depend on. The Penn-Wharton budget model goes even further, projecting that Trump's full tariff regime could reduce GDP by 6% and wages by 5% over the long run. These aren't abstract numbers, they represent real jobs, real paychecks, and real families struggling to make ends meet. What makes this even more damaging is that Canada has been fighting back with precision strikes on American products. Canada announced $155 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, targeting everything from steel and aluminum to agricultural products and consumer goods. This isn't random retaliation, it's strategic economic warfare designed to hit American producers where it hurts most.
Mark Carney has broken his promise on this. He said that he would do dollar-for-dollar tariffs during the election while he was simultaneously lifting those tariffs. And he has made concession after concession to President Trump. He's been bending over backwards for the president and so far has gotten nothing in return. We think that the counter tariff should be narrowly targeted on the things that will have the most impact on the Americans and the least impact on Canadians. We do this by targeting things that we don't need, can make ourselves, or can buy elsewhere. That will allow us a minimal opportunity cost in seeking the products from other places while increasing the political pressure on the Americans to get a deal that will allow Canada to have unfettered access to the American market.
Canadian officials have made it clear they're implementing a narrow, targeted approach, focusing on products Canada doesn't need, can produce domestically, or can source from other countries. This strategy maximizes political pressure on the U.S. while minimizing harm to Canadian consumers. The automotive sector is getting crushed on both sides of the border. General Motors Canada has already announced layoffs directly tied to the tariffs, and that's just the beginning. The integrated North American auto supply chain, built over decades of cooperation, is being systematically destroyed by Trump's policies. Canadian auto parts that cost $100 before now cost $135 after tariffs, costs that get passed directly to American consumers buying cars. But it gets worse. The tariffs are also hitting Canadian pharmaceuticals with a 35% tax, which means Americans will pay more for the $3 billion worth of Canadian medications they consume annually. In the middle of ongoing healthcare cost crises, Trump is literally making medicine more expensive for American patients. The ripple effects are spreading throughout the economy in ways that most Americans don't even realize. Canadian aluminum and steel, which American manufacturers depend on for everything from construction to consumer goods, are now 35% more expensive. This means higher costs for American builders, manufacturers, and ultimately consumers who buy their products. The lumber industry is particularly vulnerable, with Trump threatening even higher tariffs on Canadian timber. Given that Canada supplies a massive portion of America's construction materials, this could send housing costs skyrocketing just as the market was starting to stabilize. What's truly shocking is how Trump's own economic team seems to be in chaos over these policies. The process has been so disorganized that foreign officials weren't even sure whether tariffs would take effect on Thursday or Friday. Kevin Hassett, director of the White House National Economic Council, had to tell reporters to check with the U.S. Trade Representative's office when asked about basic details of the policy. This isn't competent governance, it's policy by chaos. The international response has been swift and brutal. The International Monetary Fund and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development have both downgraded their predictions for global economic growth specifically because of Trump's tariff policies. When the world's leading economic institutions are warning about American trade policy, that's not winning, that's isolation. Even more concerning is the legal challenge to Trump's tariff authority. Federal courts have already ruled that Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose these tariffs is illegal. While appeals are ongoing, the fact that multiple federal judges have declared these policies unlawful raises serious questions about their long-term sustainability. The stock market reaction tells its own story. Despite Trump's claims of economic success, major indices have been volatile, with the S&P 500 and NASDAQ posting some of their worst days in months following the tariff implementation. The Dow Jones dropped 542 points on the day the tariffs took effect. Hardly a vote of confidence from investors. What makes this particularly tragic is that it didn't have to happen this way. Canada and the US have historically had one of the world's most successful trading relationships, with $2.5 billion worth of goods and services crossing the border every day. This relationship supports millions of jobs in both countries and has been a foundation of North American prosperity for decades. Trump is systematically destroying this partnership for short-term political gain. The human cost is already becoming visible. Canadian tourism to the U.S. has dropped significantly as Canadians boycott American products and destinations. American bourbon, wine, and consumer goods are disappearing from Canadian stores as consumers choose alternatives. This isn't just economic damage, it's the breakdown of cultural and social ties that have bound these two nations together for generations. Perhaps most damaging is the precedent this sets for America's other trading relationships. If Trump is willing to launch a trade war against Canada, one of America's closest allies and most reliable partners, what does that signal to other countries? The answer is clear. America is no longer a reliable trading partner, and other nations need to find alternatives. The European Union has already announced potential retaliatory tariffs worth $84 billion on American goods. Japan, South Korea, and other key allies are all facing similar tariff threats. Trump isn't just fighting Canada, he's launching simultaneous trade wars against most of America's key economic partners. This is economic suicide disguised as strength. What's particularly infuriating is that economists saw this coming from miles away. In April, dozens of top economists, including 2 Nobel laureates, signed a letter warning that Trump's tariffs have no basis in economic reality and could cause a self-inflicted recession. They were ignored. Now their predictions are coming true, and American workers and consumers are paying the price. The manufacturing sector, which Trump claims to be protecting, is actually getting hurt by these policies. Higher input costs from tariffs are making American manufacturers less competitive, not more. The promised factory jobs haven't materialized. Instead, we're seeing job losses as companies struggle with higher costs and supply chain disruptions. Even former Republican leaders are speaking out against these policies. Paul Ryan, the former Republican House Speaker, called Trump's tariff approach irrational, saying there's no rationale other than the president wanting to raise tariffs based on his whims and opinions. When your own party's former leaders are calling your economic policy irrational, that should be a wake-up call. The real tragedy is that this could have been avoided entirely. Canada had already agreed to work with the U.S. on border security issues and had committed substantial resources to addressing Trump's concerns.
He's probably the most disliked politician in the world in Canada because he's attacked his closest family member, and that's the way we look upon it. And when I talk to the governors and senators and Congress people, even Republicans totally disagree, but they're too scared to come out and say anything because the president will go after them. Outside of a few senators, and I want to thank them for coming out and standing with not just American people, but their closest friends and allies, which is Canada.
Prime Minister Carney had announced a $1.3 billion border security plan and committed to appointing a fentanyl czar. But the damage to the relationship runs deeper than policy disagreements. Trump has become, in the words of Canadian officials, probably the most disliked politician in the world in Canada, due to his attacks on a nation Canadians view as their closest family member. Even more revealing, many U.S. governors, senators, and congresspeople, including Republicans, privately disagree with Trump's approach but are too scared to come out and say anything because they fear retaliation. But instead of working with Canada as a partner, Trump chose economic warfare. Looking ahead, the situation is likely to get worse before it gets better. Trump has threatened to raise tariffs even higher if Canada continues to retaliate, creating a dangerous escalation cycle. Canada has already announced that every dollar raised from their retaliatory tariffs will go directly to support Canadian workers affected by American trade actions. This isn't diplomacy, it's economic nationalism run amok. The long-term consequences could be catastrophic for American economic leadership. Other countries are already working to reduce their dependence on American markets and supply chains. Canada is actively promoting domestic alternatives to American products and encouraging Canadians to shop at home rather than in the U.S. This isn't just temporary retaliation, it's the beginning of a fundamental realignment of global trade relationships away from the United States. What makes this even more concerning is that it's happening at a time when America faces serious economic challenges from China and other competitors. Instead of working with allies like Canada to address these shared challenges, Trump is alienating them and forcing them to find alternatives. This is exactly what China wants: a divided West that can't coordinate effective responses to Chinese economic aggression. The bottom line is that Trump's tariff war with Canada isn't making America great. It's making America isolated, expensive, and economically weaker. American families are paying higher prices, American workers are losing jobs, and American companies are losing competitiveness. Meanwhile, one of America's closest allies and most important economic partners is being driven away by policies that economists across the political spectrum agree are counterproductive. This is what happens when ideology trumps expertise, when political theater matters more than economic reality, and when short-term political gains are prioritized over long-term national interests. The damage is already done, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. The question now is how much economic pain Americans are willing to endure for the sake of Trump's trade war fantasies. Based on the early evidence, the answer appears to be a lot more than anyone expected or deserved.